Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to do something a bit different. We're still going to ESPHome and some ESPs. As you guys do know, I love working with these things, building our own sensors, as it is usually a lot cheaper and always local if we do build our own without tinkering a lot with modifying existing off-the-shelf products that is available. So with these ESPs, we have a limited amount of I/O available, so we can only connect so many sensors before we run out of pins that we can use. But I do have something I want to show you guys that I bought a couple of years ago that may resolve some of the issues that we have, especially when it comes to setting up your home alarm system or needing a lot of sensors. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look. So here on the website, just so you guys can see, this is the thing that I bought. I bought it way back in September already. It was quite expensive, or to me, it may sound expensive, but with what you get, I paid $70, $21 shipping, and then about $20 for tax on it when it came in as well. So on these, it's a single ESP32 chip running with a lot of input pins. Now they have a variety of boards available that has different functionalities. So I cannot comment on how those boards function, but we're going to take a look at this one today to see how this specific one functions and look at some good things and some bad things of it. There's a lot of I/O on here that we can use. There's a total of 48 pins that we can use that's exposed that we are able to program in ESPHome. So there's a lot going on here. So it gives us a couple of features that we have available to us in the description. So right here you can see that we have RS232 and also RS485. Obviously, we're not going to use these ports. We're focusing on ESPHome. We do get an Ethernet jack, which is very cool, especially if you're trying to run something that is mission critical and you need a constant or reliable connection instead of using Wi-Fi. You can definitely use the Ethernet one on there as well. Then we get USB port, and then your input is variable voltage between 12 and 24 volt to power this thing. So what do you get when you buy it? Well, not a lot. You just get the board. I got the board. I can't show you packaging because it has been so long since I've gotten it, but it was basically just the board. That's it, with wrapped in a piece of paper almost. But it does come with no additional sensors or instructions even. So I had to go in and find information, go to their website. Luckily, I was able to find on their forums. They do have some sample code that we can use in ESPHome to add it into our config to see how that functions. Now, a couple of things in here as well. It does give you a IR receiver on this board right here. So you can control it by IR, which I have no idea who's ever going to use that. And then we also have the option to add a 443 sensor to this same board, which I have available. So we'll add that as well in there. And then I may have changed something small on here, but which we'll get to. So with that said, let's go in and take a look at this one. So here we have the board. Mine has a slight modification on here, and there's a reason behind it. But there's not a lot to it, just a bunch of I/O that we have. Ethernet port, which I'm not going to use in this video, but we will show you how it looks in the code. Then I did add a 443 receiver in here as well. What I did do with this one, I removed the IR sensor right here, and then I added a relay in its place. So this one is not really glued on here somewhere. What I also did notice is this is how I got it. So there's a noticeable bend in my PCB, and it's exactly how I got it. This thing has been laying for about a year and a half, almost 2 years. And that is how I got it. There's a notable flex in this board that I don't know how it got there. That's how I received this specific board. So we have a lot of things on this board to cover. What you do need to take note of is all the ports that's available to us can only be used for, they said on their website, dry contact sensors. Essentially what it means is you can only use contact sensors. If, for example, your PIR sensors should work and your door contact sensors should work, so detecting if a door is open or closed, or a window is open or closed, or switches for turning on and off things manually. But that's about it. You can't do any analog type of sensing on it, so you are definitely limited to just normal open-close sensors. That's the both two states that's available, and it has to send that data into the board. That's one thing to keep in mind of. That's the reason for me removing the IR and adding in a relay, which makes a lot more sense to have a relay on this board. Now, they do probably have a model available that does have a relay. Now, to program it, I had to go and search to find the code on the forum. At least it was posted by them, so it should work without any issues. Let's see if we can go in and try and program this thing. All I did was I just gave it some power. We definitely need to supply it with at least 12 volt to power it on. And then I connected the cable. Now, this is a different cable. It's just a normal printer cable. You will have them laying around, so just plugged it in. And we are in ESPHome. We can just go in and add the device into our ESPHome. I'm just going to call this an alarm. So that's going to be what I'll use this for. It's an ESP32. And I'll skip that, and then we can edit this config. Like I said, normally what I do is I delete the encryption from all of my information right here, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the code that he has in here. Now I'm going to skip the first one because that's the name, and we'll cover these before we upload the information to the board. There we go. Copy that. And let's see if we can paste this in here. There we go. It looks like we have everything in here. It's just a definition for all of the information that we have. So it's using I2C to connect to IO expander boards. That's what we are using. I'm going to uncomment this because we are not going to use these. The same with the IP address. We're also not going to use this in this instance, but they do give you the example so you can manually enter in the IP address and then connect the Ethernet cable instead. With these are the IO expansion boards that they use. So you'll see on the board there's little expansion boards, all of these. That's what these are for. So that's what's giving us the extra ports that we can use. And they have addresses. So you'll see these are already pre-made in here. So they have already preset the addresses and everything in here. So we should be able to good to go with these specifically. Now, in here we have all the individual inputs. So we're good with that. We don't have the relay or the IR sensor as you get it, and also not for the 443. But this should be okay. So we can go in and test it as is. So we just hit the save and install, and then just go through the standard flashing process. Remember, this is the first time flashing it, so I have to use it plugged into the computer and then download the file and then upload it. I'm not going to bother you guys with that. I'll just go through and flash it so we can open up the board again. So that has flashed. It was fairly straightforward. I just hit the install button. I didn't even need to press a button or anything. It just went through, installed everything, and we should be good to go. So if we click on the logs right here to see the information, you see there's a lot of sensors. It's going through all 48 of those sensors. Names is just for the numbers on the board itself, which is the way they programmed it. Just for testing purposes, we can just go through some of these. And we have that I2C, which is using the addresses. And I'll have a future video coming up after this one that we also take a look at these specific boards itself. But it's just connecting to those individual boards that's on here that addresses the ports that we have assigned to them in ESPHome. So what I did, I just connected this red cable to a ground pin that's available. And if we go through any of these, pulls that state for 48 on off, and we can go through. I have already tested these and they all work fine. If we go through, no problem at all. So that's good. What I did also add is the web server. I forgot to add that in the code. It shows us these states for all of the pins that we have on here as well. So now that we have everything connected, we have our sample code in there. A couple of things that we have to take note of before we start setting up or start connecting random sensors and running into a couple of issues. The very first thing that I would like you guys to be aware of with the specific board, this one that I have specifically, is just for inputs. It cannot do any outputs at all, meaning that all of these pins that's listed right here is only going to be for contact sensors. So PIR, door sensors, light switches, and those types of stuff that sends the signal back to the board. One more thing on that is this is a 12 volt based board, so all of these only gets triggered once it receives 12 volt signal, which is all good and fine if we're using contact sensors like these reed switches that's on windows and doors, or your light switches and everything that uses just normal standard switches, which just bridges to ground. That's all fine. But a lot of us has been hoarding these for some time. As we do projects, we just decide we buy more and more. So we probably have most of these laying around in our house. Now the problem with these is that they send a 5-volt output signal at max. So to trigger something, they normally send out 5 volts or something like this, meaning that it will not be enough to power or send a signal to this board in order to show that this has been triggered. Those will not work. So we have to use something like these. These are 12-volt PIR sensors. The ones that I bought came with 4 wires. They normally have 2 power wires, which was just bridged together. So I just cut off one. And then we have our ground and then the signal cable right here. And they function on 12 volt. They have no settings. I bought the cheapest ones available. I just got them and to see if I can test them out. Now, for a lot of people, having it 12 volt could be an advantage as well. Looking at most alarm systems or the older alarm systems, all of the PIR sensors that you have connected is probably going to be 12 volt, depending on the system that you have installed. So if your alarm did fail or you're trying to replace it with something a bit more modern, you can always just use the existing sensors that's in there. Another option is using that 443 for these wireless PIR sensors. However, what would be the point of using this when you have 48 ports available to you? So, don't recommend it. Always use the wires instead of the 443. So with that said, I'm going to go through and connect a couple of sensors, and then we can do some testing with it. I added a couple of sensors, so I just have one contact, so the read switch right here. I have a PIR sensor that I have connected just to pin 1 and pin 2. Then also had the code modified it. I searched for the code for the IR receiver that they included on the board. I just desoldered it. That's why my board looks a bit different. I just desoldered it and added in a relay instead. And then I've also connected a 443 receiver. Now, this is the cheapest 443 receiver you can get. Just keep that in mind as well. Let's take a look at the code that I have in here so I can just show you how everything has been set up. So the only things that I've changed in here is going to be, if we scroll down from that sample code, is right here under the individual inputs. So the first one I added was the switch. We did discuss this in the previous videos on how to add a relay. So this is just a relay, and then I added an icon because my idea behind this is we can connect a thing like this or like this to it for a siren for when the alarm gets triggered, because that's essentially going to be the main use for this board at the end of the day for that amount of inputs. And then on the first sensor that they had, remember it was called the AI port 1 or something. I just made that into a PIR sensor. So the only thing that I did change was change the name. Added a device class for motion. That's just for Home Assistant to easily identify that it is a motion sensor. And then I left everything as is. Now you'll notice it shows these in here. Now these will be discussed in the next video. I have a couple of things in mind that I want to go over on how to create your own of these. And then I added a door sensor, which is going to be that read switch, and everything is exactly the same. The only thing I did was change the name of that sensor and then added in the device class for the door. Now, the other thing I did was I also added in the code for the remote receiver. So this is going to be the code that I'm using for the 443 receiver. Again, we'll cover it in a future video on how to add sensors custom within ESPHome that gets detected in Home Assistant. But this is the code in here. There's just dump RC switch, which is just the sensors and the pin that it's connected to. And then I just have some filters in here that you can modify, which we will discuss in the future. But that's about it. So if we go up and back to the board, you'll see I have the door in here, the PIR, and then siren, which would be the relay that is connected onto this board. So if we take a look at the information in here, so if I start moving this motion sensor, it should trigger that right there. So the PIR just got triggered. So that state is now on, as you can see right here. Then with the read switches, as you all know, they work with magnets. So if I take the magnet part of it and put it closer, you'll see that it changes the state of that sensor to on for the door. or you can reverse it by just turning off the inverted trigger on there as well, depending on how Home Assistant uses it on their side. And then the last one is the siren, which I manually added the relay in there because I have no idea why they decided to include a IR receiver in a board that'll probably be tucked away somewhere very far. And that one is working as well. So all you'll do is you'll go through and identify every single pin to every single thing that you have added on there. And then if you're using the 443, which is any 443 sensors or devices that you may have, pressing it is going to send that code, which we will use in a future video to set up some additional devices in Home Assistant as well. And that would be the same for these PIR sensors as well, which sends the wireless signal instead of having a wire to them. But we will definitely cover that in the future as well. This one was just a quick overview of these boards. There's quite a few of them, especially if you search on AliExpress with a lot of information. My idea is have something that I'm working on. So I have this little guy that I've been working on, which I will have a separate video of coming soon, which we will go in more depth in using that with the normal sensors and take a look at that as well. So that's going to be it for this one, guys. Just a quick overview of exactly how this board functions. Again, keep in mind, a bunch of different boards available, and there's a lot more different sellers that does almost exactly the same thing. But like I said, always just double check and make sure it is exactly what you need, because you may run into the weird issues like the power not being enough or it not being able to do sensors or relays in this case, which I had to modify mine just to get a relay to work on there as well. But again, this is just for the specific board I got. That's why I'm working on my own one. And also in my case, the way I want to set it up is having removable sensors from the specific board. So if one component fails, it's easier to replace something that costs $5 instead of replacing an entire board of $50 or $70 in this case. But with that said, I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your week.